Huh?
It's backwards.
Be careful.
Alright,
I don't think so. No, there isn't. Screw it.
Okay, we'll do our best, see what happens. And then worst case, I go home and record this all over. Okay. Alright, so you get your lecture slides out. Last lecture, reminder, final exams on Tuesday, so not much time between now and then. What we'll do is we'll look a little bit at reports on public sector. After we finish reports on public sector, we'll talk about the assignment a little bit. So some of you should already be seeing your marks come up because the TA has been marking through the evening today. And some of you will probably see later tonight. Right, so as the marks are coming up, she's posting them right away, so please don't email me after and be like, my friends saw their mark in class, but mine wasn't up. It will come up, within a day or so. Okay? We'll talk a little bit about the final exam, what to expect, if there's any surprises, and so on. Right, there's nothing magical on the final exam that you don't know about, nothing like you might see in certain second and third year courses. So agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about PS 5000. So basically the focus will be anything related to government entity audits. All right, so we're talking about the audit standards for government entities. So here's sort of the agenda. When we get into, we'll stick to questions and go get right into it. We're talking about government entities. Always ask the question, what are the 5 parts of the handbook right now that you know of? So part 1 is IFRS, part 2 is ASPE, part 3 is, this is kind of the most important one for today. It's not public sector. Not-for-profit, okay? So part 3 is not-for-profit, part 4 is pensions, and then part 5 is old Canadian GAAP. So you don't use part 5. Part 3, that's for not-for-profit, is for private not-for-profits. Okay? So if you've got a foundation, or like a tennis club that's a not-for-profit, or a golf course that's a that's not a for-profit entity, then those private not-for-profits fall apart. 3. Public sector, which is government entities, or entities controlled by the government, use what's called public sector accounting standards. Now, public sector accounting standards is a handbook on its own. Okay, so when you go into Notion, you kind of scroll and you see accounting and you see assurance. After that, there should probably be something called public sector accounting. Right, so PSAB, as it's called, so you see the first bullet on the slide, PSAB is what we're looking at. So PSAB is the accounting standards and the auditing standards for public sector. So the people that use PSAB is what we'll discuss, right? Just so let that sink in for a second. So all this time we've been talking about regular audits that don't comprise government entities, okay? Private companies, public companies, private not-for-profits, that's CAS standards, OCS standards, all of the above. When you get into government entities, specifically focus on public sector standards. Okay, they've got their own handbook, they also have their own assurance standards. Their own assurance standards is what will come. Okay? So when you do look at government entities, there's 2 types. There's the actual components of the government, so municipalities, cities, provinces, and so on. So that's one bucket. The other bucket is entities controlled by the government. So what you see here are GPOs, Crown Corporations, government business enterprises. Those are enterprises that, for example, if you think about LCBO, right? LCBO is controlled by the government, a for-profit entity. May or may not follow PSAB, but it's an entity that has to follow public sector accounting or assurance rules. Now, when this material and these examples were given in the handbook, these have changed a little bit over time. So some government business enterprises actually use IFRS. So if they don't use PSAB, they will use IFRS. They don't use ASPE. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. This is new development. This kind of just came to light in recent months. For the longest time, everyone thought that all crown corporations use PSAB. That's not the case. Some of them do use IFRS. So a key difference that we look at when we're talking about public sector assurance standards and regular assurance standards is the types of audits that you do. Okay, so there's 3 primary types of audits, and those types of audits are driven by the underlying objective of those entities. So if you're a government, you're not trying to make a profit. You're trying to provide social services. You're trying to provide other benefits for the community rather than trying to maximize your profit. So based on that, there's comprehensive auditing services that come out. So you will see financial statement audits, obviously. But in addition to those, you generally see compliance type audits. So there's rules that they must follow for certain things. So if you think of a hospital, there's certain ministry guidelines that they must follow on how many patients come through, what the level of care is, so on and so on. Those compliance type assurance services are covered under these public sector standards. And then there's value for money audits. So if you're paying a government agency for something, are you getting maximum value? And then on the flip side, the government is funding a certain agency. Is that agency providing value for the money that they're being funded? Right? So you've got to look at it both ways. So those are the 3 kind of primary buckets that we'll cover off today. Okay. So when you're looking at compliance audits, so we want to talk about financial statement audits, which is that first bucket. You guys know how to do those by now. When you're looking at compliance audits, there's 3 types of reports. There is an engagement that you might come in for, which is primarily just for compliance, right? So did this entity comply with certain ministry guidelines? So we'll use the hospital example. They have a book that says, these are the accounting standards you must follow. These are the sort of other standards for care, for patient quality, for the quality of your service, for the quality of your facilities. Let's say there's a coffee shop in there. There's rules for all of that, right? So the compliance audit is on whether or not you are in compliance with those things. The second type and the third type, one's a positive, one's a negative. Right? So positive type of assurance is compliance with certain transactions. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go into the slides. There's also the opposite of that is where you have to report on instances of non-compliance. So if they were offside on certain rules and you come across that, then you need to report that to someone. So when we're talking about compliance, if you think back to the auditor's reports that I've shown you guys, in the report they'll always say this particular company has presented their financial information accurately in all material respects, right? In accordance with ASPE or IFRS, whatever that might be. So when you're doing a compliance audit, you are presenting your information accurately in all significant respects, right? That's the key there. Because there's no material when you're looking at certain types of compliance standards, right? So level of care, for example, in a hospital, if there is a significant deficiency in the level of care, quality of care, there is a certain level of judgment involved in that, right? So if you're a hospital administrator, you would know when you go to a different hospital if the quality of service is good or not. So an audit being performed by someone who knows the industry, who understands the service, will have to use a level of judgment to determine if there is a significant deficiency or not. If there is a minor deficiency, usually that is not reported. That's not something you kind of put on your auditor's report. If there is a significant deficiency, similar to an audit, if there is a material misstatement, would you qualify your audit report? Right? So the last bullet on the slide talks about when there is widespread non-compliance. Okay? Like a really egregious example, if it's a hospital and patients are dying and everyone's getting infected from surgeries and stuff like that, you are probably going to report that, right? If somebody, out of 1,000 surgeries performed in the year, there was one minor case of infection which got treated very quickly, doctors responded right away, that's not something you would report. Okay, so if you think about it in that perspective, what is significant, what is not, at the end of the day, if there is significant deficiencies, then you would qualify your report. Okay, so a quick reminder, an unqualified audit opinion is a clean audit opinion. A qualified audit opinion is a slightly bad audit opinion. And then a disclaimer of opinion or denial of opinion is the really, really bad type of audit opinion, right? If you ever get a disclaimer of opinion or a denial of opinion, there is a really, really big problem. Okay, so similarly in a compliance type audit, you would qualify your report to say, that certain transactions didn't meet or we couldn't get support over certain transactions and so on. Okay, so the second type of compliance audit is where you're providing an opinion on transactions. So generally when you have to report or give an opinion on transactions, you are doing this as a subset of a bigger engagement. Okay, so what that means is, let's say you are brought in to do an audit of a hospital. And the reason I use hospitals is because I've seen these firsthand. Hospitals are generally the most common type of compliance entities. There's others out there, but when you look at government entities that are standalone, that provide for government services, they're a little bit different than a hospital that could be private, could be a government entity. So in a hospital, they need to get an audit of all their financials. Okay, so their financial statements annually must be audited, and that audit report is submitted to a ministry that deals with funding for the hospital. In addition to that, the hospital also has to submit a number of compliance reports, right? Were they in compliance with this standard on patient care? Were they in compliance with this standard for how they manage their money? Were they in compliance with this standard for how they dealt with trust funds, for example? So, if it's long-term care, which means patients are there for a long period of time, then people come and put money in their trust accounts. There's a lot of rules around how that money is managed, how that, every patient must have its own record of how much money is coming in and so on. So all of those sort of pieces, they have to keep track for compliance purposes. So now when you go in to do a financial statement audit, you'll also look at, for example, the trust account. And you look at the transactions flowing through the trust account. As part of your engagement, you will scope in transactions from those subsets, so the trust account, or from management of money that's paid over and above what's covered by the government, and so on. Those transactions are things you might have to report on. These are generally not standalone engagements. In some cases they are, but most times they're part of a bigger audit engagement. So the second bullet there says must reference the other audit. So in your report, you'll say as part of the audit for the financial statements, we also tested X number of transactions for, let's say, the trust account, and they were in compliance with ministry guidelines. That's what we're talking about, okay, for compliance. Now the last bucket is your reporting on non-compliance. So similarly to when you're testing for compliance, you will, or as part of a bigger engagement, sometimes you will report the other way where you say, we identified 5 instances of non-compliance. When you look at it in that way, you have to also think about, does this impact my bigger audit? Does this have any audit implications for me on my other engagement? Now, there's different approaches for how you look at non-compliance audits, whether you have to test more in some cases if there's issues or not. Depending on the situation, you kind of adjust your approach. The last point there, the overall conclusion. So if you're there doing the financial statement audit, you do not provide an overall opinion on compliance or non-compliance. You just identify where you saw non-compliance and you report that, And then if they ask you to do more work, you do more work. You are not making a blanket conclusion on this company or this hospital is non-compliant with these guidelines. Okay?
So for this one, we are just giving the facts.
Yes.
So, so for this one, we are just giving the instances that are not compliant.
Yes.
So it's like a review.
It's very similar to like specified procedures actually.
Oh.
Right? So let's say you tested 100 transactions and 5 were non-compliant. You're going to say we identified 5 5 instances of non-compliance. You probably identified what those transactions are. So somebody to investigate and see what they're on. So any questions on the compliance or non-compliance reports or the standards that apply for us? Okay, so far so good. So the next bucket, PS 5400, is value for money audits. Okay, so value for money audits are primarily driven by you, the stakeholder. You pay your taxes. As a student, probably don't pay much in terms of taxes, but when you do become regular tax-paying citizens, you are very concerned about whether or not the taxes are being, used well. Okay? So when you think of Trump and some of his campaign promises, he always said, we're going to drain the swamp, right? When you think of Rob Ford, I forget, we're going to trim the fat, or whatever his punchline was. But all of these politicians come in and say, hey, there's a lot of wastage in the government, so we want to make sure that we're using tax dollars as best as we possibly can. Now, the way to identify whether or not that money is being wasted or not is to do a value for money audit. Okay, so when you're doing a value for money audit, the things you're thinking about is whether or not there's economy in the service, whether there's efficiency in the service, and whether the money is effectively being used or the resources spent are being effectively used. We call them the 3 E's. It's kind of this jargon. At the end of the day, are your tax dollars going as fast as far as they can? If you had to run the service, could you have done it any better with the same objectives that the ministry was using the funds for? And that's the overall principle you're thinking about. Okay. So when you look at value for money audits, there's no accounting standard per se, or no general standard that you can apply. There is a lot of judgment involved in what you do in a value for money audit. Now the mandates will vary depending on the type of agency it is, the type of ministry it is, what you're looking for. But the people that do this the most are the Auditor General, right? So the Auditor General's office will go in, they'll send their people in and see if the money or government money is being used in the best manner possible. And then in cases where it's not, so for example, community housing may not be using their money so well. There's other agencies that might not be using, they'll get a scathing report from the Auditor General. So every now and again in the news, you'll see, like a scathing report come out of a certain ministry that's coming from the Auditor General, but they're using value for money principles when they're doing their audits. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind the next time you see that article about some ministry or agency that's being criticized. What you're looking for is you first need to define your objective of your scope, right? So what are you looking for? What are you trying to achieve? You go back and your report must reference the public sector 5400 standard. You will usually state what your criteria is and what you're looking for, very similar to your objective. You also state whether or not you have any significant findings, if there's any deficiencies in the particular entity that you're auditing, and at the end of the day, usually provide some recommendations, right? So these are the issues we found. Here's some recommendations on how we think we can fix them, right? Those recommendations are where you're adding service, so like we tell you in your cases, make sure if you find an issue, you make a recommendation, right? Because if you make a recommendation, it's the same principle that applies here. You are adding value to the entity you're providing the service for. Okay. With execution, there must always be planning. So when you're planning a value for money audit, you're looking at 6410 for where the standards are on planning these particular types of audits. The audits for value for money are very different than when you're doing a financial statement audit. Right? When you're doing a financial statement audit, you go in and identify the risks, and very structured, where you determine what your materiality is, then you determine your approach, you design some procedures. The procedures have assertions, and they're all responsive to financial statement risks. When you're doing a value for money audit, some of those principles apply, and I think the next slide talked about similarities. Right, so some of these, client acceptance, risk, and so on is all there, but there's a lot of things that aren't cookie cutter. Right, so the scope and the mandate changes, the objectives change from one engagement to the next, just because these are so different. You need to always think about the type of team you're bringing. Right, so depending on the type of agency, if it's a hospital, perhaps your team needs to include a medical professional of some kind. Right, or a hospital administrator, somebody that knows the industry. If it involves, oil and gas or something like that, if there's a ministry that's in charge of the oil sands, you probably don't have the expertise to go into a value for money audit. And you need to bring in someone that understands the industry. So you have to always be considering, well, what kind of team do I need to make, and how long will this engagement take? Okay, because different engagements take longer, shorter, depending on size of the entity and complexity. There is no standard report that you issue at the end of the day. Sometimes they don't even issue a report because maybe you don't need to. The engagement might say you need to come in and report any deficiencies. If there are no deficiencies, perhaps you don't issue a report. Right? I've seen it personally where they've come in and done value for money audit at a client, and they never issued a report. If they didn't issue a report, that means there were no problems or nothing significant. Right? You always want to try and figure out what significant is at these, in these audits, which is similar to materiality. So when we talk about similarities, the third bullet there identifies significance. When I think of significance in a value for money audit, it's the same as whether you're doing something is material from a financial statement perspective. Right? If you think it's material, you're going to report on it. Other things that are similar, knowledge of the business, risks, use of specialists, internal audit, things like that. These are all things you know about, you've heard about before, so there's nothing new here. You just kind of change your approach as you go into one value for money audit to another. These are also not very common. So if you're working in private, assurance services with a public practitioner, you are mostly going to do audits, reviews, and compilation engagements. You're going to do a lot of tax returns. You are probably not going to see very many value for money audits, if any. Right? I've only ever, and I've been doing this for 8+ years. I'd only once ever seen a value for money audit done, and that was at a client that I was doing the audit for. Right? So we were auditing a hospital, and at the same time, or just before us, the Auditor General's office, their folks had come in to do a value for money audit on the same hospital. So while we spent all our time with the accounting people, these guys would walk around the hospital, talk to patients, talk to doctors. They talk to the administration folks, they talk to billings, they talk to all these other people, most of whom weren't even involved with the financial reporting company. Right? So it's very different in scope on when you do see value for money audits. So 6240, knowledge of the audit entity defining these audits. This isn't very different than knowledge of the business when you're looking at a financial statement audit. You need to understand basic understanding first, because having a basic understanding of the entity will help you identify if there's any risks. Also will help you identify whether or not you would accept that engagement or not. Okay, so if you do not have the expertise or the means to get that expertise on your team, then you should probably not accept that engagement. Once you have a general understanding of the entity, then you get into a more detailed understanding to identify significant risk areas or high risk areas and so on. Very, very similar to how you would do it for any regular audit. So nature, most of these are very similar to what you know of. So the things you look at is So programs or systems, you don't always just consider like the manual features in value for money audits. You can also be looking at the IT environment, and based on how that IT environment is set up, you can get a better gauge of the types of procedures that you will design. Right? Any questions? Okay. Do you guys want to do the exercise or not? Have you guys done the exercise? How many of you did the exercise? Did you pre-read the? Does anyone have the case book? Okay. So in the exercise, it's more of the same. We go through a lot of the same concepts on value for money audits and public sector audits. We can do the exercise, but it'll be a repetition largely of what I just talked about. So if you're okay with skipping that, we can take a short break, come back and talk about the assignment, and talk about the final, and then you guys are on your way. I'd rather do that. And here's some head nods and some head nods. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and regroup on the assignment and the final.